All right, I am going to get started. Thank you all for coming. This is the SIG release deep dive, and in particular, I want to focus the conversation on the topic of support and LTS. So just briefly, who here is familiar with the term LTS? A few, okay. So briefly, also who was here yesterday for the SIG release intro? Okay. So briefly, I'll talk about the release process and the release lifecycle, and then go into the implications that the way we do that has on vendors, distributors, and hosted providers, and how they install and upgrade their clusters. And then I want to open things for a discussion because I want to understand pain points from the community here. So first, briefly, the release process. We make 4 releases of Kubernetes each year. It's quarterly and on a 3-month cadence. And this makes it look like a waterfall process, but it's actually much more agile than this. There's always discussion going on in the community about features. And a first thing then to highlight is that we've stopped calling it features. We have an enhancement process because there's more than just features. There's bug fixes, there's refactoring, code cleanups. But about 4 weeks into the cycle, we have our enhancements freeze. And at that point, we've built up a list of the enhancements that are targeted for this release. And we ask the SIGs to focus their work primarily on those. And then there's a period of time where coding happens on these and everything is moving along at a rapid pace like open source does. But then we declare a code freeze about 8 weeks in. And from this point forward, only critical bug fixes are supposed to be merged into the branch. After a period of bug fixing, we open the master branch back up and it begins to receive development for the next release. And the current release is built from the release branch, and we ship it. So this is sort of what 2018 has looked like. The year started with that process happening in the first 3 months of the year. But then once we ship a release, we get 9 months of patch releases where backports happen of critical bug fixes to this branch. Because in the meantime, master branch has continued on. 1.11 starts to get built. And if there's a critical bug fix there, it needs to come back into the prior branch. And this continues on during the course of the year for the 1.12 release. And then right now, we have the 1.13 release being worked on. But you can see that we have 3 releases here getting stable patches all at the same time being backported. Once 1.13 is released, 1.10 will no longer be supported. It will stop getting patches backported. The 3 supported will be 11, 12, and 13. And then we have this cycle that continues year after year. So support from a coding perspective is backporting the critical bug fixes to the release branch. 3 releases get support. And like I said, right now the latest stable is 1.12. So the 3 that are getting support are 1.12, 1.11, and 1.10. As a user, then you see roughly 9 months of support. You can stay on a particular code branch and know that you won't be insecure, that important fixes will come back. But what this means then is you have to plan an upgrade every 3 to 6 months. 4 times a year possibly, maybe 2 or 3. But if you get too far behind, you could get stuck. And as other talks this week at the conference have reminded, our upgrade path is to go from release to release. You can't go from release 1.10 via upgrade to 1.12. You have to go from 1.10 to 11 to 12 and iteratively take these single steps. So that means as a user or operator, you might incur a lot of time in planning every few months your next transition and deploying it, testing it, getting it into production. And then maybe you spend very little time actually in stable production because you're constantly moving forward. So this then invariably brings up the question of what we call LTS. LTS is a term in the state of the art, both in proprietary software and in open source software. It's long established as a thing, but what is it? So only a few hands came up when I asked if people know what it is. It's an acronym and it stands for long-term support. And this amounts to a policy. Somebody makes a decision, like what I've just described here for Kubernetes. We have 3 releases, 9 months, 4 times a year. Every project makes some sort of a policy like this, but then you write it down and users know what to expect. There's all sorts of different policies like this. Some projects will say they do it for 2 years instead of 9 months. Some maybe will do bug fixes for a year, just any bug fixes, and then narrow it down to just the most important security fixes for an additional period. And then the important thing to think about here is that long is measured usually in either a year type of time frame or multiple years. And then usually there's also something for short term because this is open source. It's rapidly iterating along. And why would you do this? Well, there's obvious benefits. Like I've alluded to, as a user of the open source project, you don't want to spend all of your time planning and moving. You actually want to have stable production. Usually your goal isn't to just be changing Kubernetes. Your goal is to run things on top of Kubernetes and deliver value to users. So all of this churn can be a distraction from you. And then beyond just that churn, for your workloads that are running on top of Kubernetes, having something like LTS, if it's done successfully, it requires that there's good compatibility between releases. That means as a user, when you do upgrade, your experience is better. Similarly for vendors, and I'll go into this in more detail later, but every vendor in the ecosystem, they're doing some level of support for their customers. And surely they all do something that's unique value add for their customers. But if we're all doing this in parallel, there's also some common portion. And if we can do that common portion together in open source, we can be stronger and get a better result for the end users of all of our systems. Finally, for developers, the idea of cross-release compatibility, a good developer wants to give that to their users. But it's hard to see. The way we see that we have problems on compatibility is through testing and through end-user bug reports. If we're going to do something like an LTS in an open source project, then we must have good testing. So if we go in the direction of an LTS, it means that we're going to have better testing, which would be a good thing for our developers. Now, it's not all positive. There's actually problems, risks, and costs to doing LTS. Today we have this simple scheme of 3 releases a year with support for 9 months, and up until this point, it's about to change in a couple of months, but up until this point, that 9 months of support has been handled by one person in the Kubernetes community. That means that there's 3 people at any time doing support for everyone. If we add something like LTS, and maybe we do 1 LTS every year and support it for 2 or 3 years, that means instead of 3 things to test and manage and staff for a short amount of time, we maybe have 6 things to manage and staff for a long time. And that comes at a cost. We need more people involved. And then testing becomes more complex. If you have an LTS, then often you want to be able to upgrade from LTS to LTS. Right now, we only have 1 thing to test. The current version to the next version, or maybe 3 instances of that. But with an LTS scheme, you have more of these possible jumps. And then it's not just the number of things that you have to test, it's actually more complex technically. Ensuring API stability, like I'm a software engineer, and I'll just say, we are bad at doing this. And it only gets worse when the time gets longer. If we make the occasional mistake, maybe we notice it and fix it, but it's one thing to have to think about a mistake in a month versus a mistake in 36 months. If we make 1 mistake in a month, well, then in 36 months, there's 36 mistakes, and the users have much more problems. And then the upgrade path. It's no good if you have a stable support branch so you can be in production and have an easier life if you're permanently stuck there. You need a way to upgrade to something newer eventually. So again, the technical complexity of upgrade is already large, but the best case for upgrade is if you upgrade almost every day. You're only deploying tiny bits of code. It's easier to test and as an engineer rationalize and prove that the upgrade is correct. When you go to many years, you have a much bigger technical problem to understand what all might have changed and validate that that change was safe and correct. This is very complex to do well. So with all of this in mind, I was the release lead on the 112 release team, and I was getting a lot of questions and seeing a lot of problems on our current support process. And that led me to say, well, let's have a broad discussion in the community about what our users want for support and what our developers technically can do. And maybe we see some gaps and can do things to improve those. So initially, we've just started up this working group. We're working on getting a charter merged into the community repo describing what we intend to do. But initially, we know we want to collect stakeholder feedback and get requirements. What do people need for support? And then within that, gauge the willingness of vendors and distributors to contribute to the upstream. If we're going to do something for longer support, or even if it's not long-term support, it's just doing better, we need more people contributing to test automation, to tools that allow migration between different config or API versions. So it's not just enough to notice there's a problem. We have to get a commitment from people to contribute to fixing things and improving. Now, the simplistic approach would be to say, well, LTS is the community answer. So as a working group, hopefully we'll say what it takes to make an LTS, and we'll pick one in the future, say 1.20 is the first LTS release, and we're going to have one LTS per year and support it for 2 years, and we'll make upgrade possible, all of this stuff. But as a working group, we don't want to presuppose that that's what we're going to do, because many of us don't like that model, the traditional LTS model of one release every year or two in these big gaps, because technically it's very hard to actually do well. So we want to actually brainstorm new ways and sort of not take this easy path to going with just the traditional way of doing better support, but maybe see if we can invent a new model here. And especially because Kubernetes is about cloud native and rapidly deploying applications, maybe we can actually make it so it's easier to similarly have Kubernetes rapidly deploy. So instead of wanting a long-term support branch that you stay on for 2 years, we make it to where you've changed your mindset and it's technically easy and safe to every month move to a new Kubernetes version. So we're trying to keep an open mind and figure out what we can come up with proposals. And whatever that is, then it will come back to SIG release to actually operationalize. But that's going to be sometime in 2019 at best. We're going to spend many months now just understanding the state of the community and what's desired. But a key takeaway I think that I want to give to people is we have many, many vendors in the ecosystem. If I'm a vendor and I'm making Kubernetes for my customer, I'm going to have at least one person whose job it is to do the support, to bring in patches and build it and manage my branch of Kubernetes. If there's 80 of us doing that with one person, well, first, one person is going to do probably a marginal job of it. All good credit to one of our past patch release managers who's put a lot of work into this. It's a very hard job for one person. But if there's 80 of us, if we could come together as a team, what we could accomplish is very large. And then just to highlight the vendors here, some of the vendors here in Asia, there's at least 20. And again, that by itself is a huge team of potential engineers. If there's one engineer at each company doing this, or maybe there's 2 or 3, it could be 40 or 60 engineers. Surely we could invent something really cool and good that makes Kubernetes wonderful for users together. So at this point, I want to open up to a conversation and see what thoughts people have. Is Kubernetes releasing too fast or too slow? Do we stop support too fast or too slow? If you've deployed, what problems do you have upgrading from 1.10 to 1.11? How many people does your company have doing this today? Could we come together and do something more strongly? And how can together we work to improve the cross-release and also cross-vendor compatibility? So I've kind of gone through this quickly because I wanted to leave about half of our time to talk. So I'm hoping people have questions or thoughts and comments. This is literally my last slide. Yeah, can we get the microphone?
Hi there. I feel like LTS is the natural step for Kubernetes. Like most of the clusters that actually we deploy, I'm like a vendor in Eastern Europe, like deploying and supporting Kubernetes. So like 60% of the deployments that we do them for non-production environments like staging, development, or testing. So the use case for LTS has not arrived like on our side, mostly because the production environments are pretty new. So like we run like 1.8, the latest, yeah, exactly, the latest, the oldest clusters. But like, you know, LTS comes when you start having problems with your like old clusters, because the cost of upgrading the clusters, it's pretty high. You need to invest a lot of man hours in order to do like the upgrades and keep all the clusters on the latest version. And then you need to be sure like the CRDs that you build on top of it, or even the applications are up to date and okay to use the new versions. So I mean, I think like I see that a lot of organizations just keep older versions and think of them that, okay, we don't get any patches, but we consider them LTS because they didn't broke until now. Yes. So
what do you think about, so is that only in dev test because where you don't have security concerns?
Yeah, I think in production as well, because like I was speaking with with Liz yesterday on the security discussion, and like organizations don't have a culture for security on a cloud native application. Mostly they think if we can create a border like around Kubernetes and we put some firewalls, then security will be, it's hard enough, it's strong enough. So I don't agree with that. We still need to work on the educational part for the security. But yeah, I mean, as I see like organizations use Kubernetes now, they just stick to like a version that it's working, and they consider it LTS even though if they don't get too many.
They don't get the S.
Yeah, exactly. It's LT. Yeah. Yeah. So like LTS will be highly welcome, and like the business benefit will be like reducing the cost of upgrading and keeping it to the, because it's a huge overhead now.
Yeah.
So if the pitch will be, okay, you need to contribute in order to reduce the cost of keeping your applications and your environments up to date and secure, then it should be pretty obvious for them.
I partly want to ask your customer list and if I can get access to your clusters so I can make a bunch of money taking over them since they're running ancient 1.8 and insecure. Yeah. But yeah, the security portion, I'm surprised to hear that people wouldn't be more worried about that. From my perspective, that's just vitally critical to ensure the security, and whoever has the ability to, via kubectl, contact your cluster, or who writes the container code that's running on your cluster. I mean, your 1.8, your entire cluster could be remotely taken over today. Yeah, that should scare you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, people now are looking for reducing time to market and increasing developer productivity. That's the main goal. So like Kubernetes is just one of the ways you can do that. So like organizations now are trying to become more agile and to achieve those goals. And like on a medium to longer term, I think security will become like people will focus more on security. But I think like with the organization that you're working with as well, like we've noticed even in large organizations like digital digital transformation managers or like business people that are focused only on launching products as fast as they can, they try to overcome the security issues. They try to find workarounds just to come up with these deployments. So like security, because doesn't understand that much how they can like do like context security, or like how do you treat like a zero trust network or something like that. They will do just like a security at a border level and do some firewalls and make sure that the Kubernetes API won't be accessible from the outside world. So that's pretty okay for them. And if you look at like legacy organization, this is how security has been done for the past years. I mean,
but I think the way that the world is becoming a much more hostile environment on the internet. There's so much money to be made by attacking these resources.
Totally agree.
The past, I'm not sure, and this is one of my biases against the traditional LTS model, is that I don't know that security in the past, the methods are quite as relevant to today. And maybe we need to figure out how to be more agile moving forward to mitigate the security risks.
So just hearing that, one of the things that made me wonder is, feels like we should probably meet our users where they are.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, exactly right, and find the way that's most effective to get them where we want them to be. And one of the things I feel like I don't know enough about, and I'd love to see more data, or maybe we could brainstorm on a way to gather it, would be globally what versions of Kubernetes are actually being run by people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see in this list. These are vendors and distributions and certified hosting platforms, but if you look at the numbers of options versus what's at each release, there's less here than there, and the numbers are sort of not quite, we don't have enough data to say it's a Gaussian distribution, but 1.12 has been out for 45 days, roughly, and 11 of the 80 have moved to it. And 1.9 has been out for almost a year, but again, only half are there. So that's a little disturbing to me. It's hard to say what people are running. The other aspect of this is maybe people aren't running these. The early adopters maybe are building their own. They could be building something newer. Or there was a talk earlier, the Upgrading Your Clusters talk by Google a couple of hours ago. One of the people in the audience said, we're running 1.9 and struggling to upgrade to 1.10. But 1.9 is also already out of support, and they haven't managed, in that 9 months, they weren't able to upgrade somehow. So
it's very difficult to convince organizations to put money into upgrades that don't provide like a real business value. Because the focus now it's like move to the cloud, become agile.
I think, sadly, that one of the things that's going to drive that change is more high-profile exploits. But it's very difficult from a business perspective. As a business manager, you're used to measuring the cost of development versus the revenue you'll receive. And in this case, the cost of development, it doesn't give you revenue. But the flip side is if you don't pay for that development, you will incur future expense. And managing cost today versus future expense is not what simplistic business managers do. They manage cost today versus future revenue, the opposite of expense. So finding how to convince and train, and I'm a software engineer, not a business person, but part of this is a business equation.
Exactly. Like nobody, like if you discuss to like a CFO or something like that who's in the, just with the numbers, they understand like putting some dollars, they must bring you like 10 times more or something like that. If it doesn't, if this equation doesn't work, it doesn't matter. So you're asking them to put money just to secure the existing revenue stream, not just to create a new revenue stream. So like in the business world, I'm a technical person as well, but I'm dealing with those kind of issues, and my understanding is that we should come up with a proper way for them to understand that like missing out or having downtime or I don't know, it's like a real business threat. And it's not just a like an investment, but it's the cost of running things.
It's a normal cost of business.
So I think it's just like a pitching problem. And you said like high threats, like high profile exploits or something like that. Like the Tesla one was kind of really well known and public, but the problem with like enterprises, they don't disclose those kind of breaches. I mean, they constantly have problems with their software, with like a lot of things, but they don't disclose them. So by not disclosing them, like the community and nobody knows exactly what's happening from a security perspective, and they mitigate it through like creating more boundaries and adding proxies and stuff like that.
I think that there we can make some progress, because from the perspective of these vendors and products, platforms and distributions, those people, those business entities who are certified performant in Kubernetes, they actually get early access to confidential and embargoed security vulnerabilities. Yeah. So on the release team, I see the current incoming vulnerabilities, us mitigating them and then announcing them. The normal public only sees when they come out. Exactly, so as a vendor or a distribution, part of the business ecosystem, if you choose to engage, you will probably be somewhat scared by what you see, because there is a lot actually going on. And maybe that then informs the business choice to say, wow, this is actually going to be a problem. Security must be managed more proactively.
I think at the end of the day, if you, I mean, I totally agree with the approach that you've got. But at the end of the day, I think the problem is the process and the resource allocation. So if you need to, like, human resources are like pretty high in demand all around the world. Like, people that really know how Kubernetes works and how you can do deploy on them. So like instead of the cost of maintaining Kubernetes is pretty high now. So I think if like the update tool will become seamless and will become just as a tool, and like the vendors can provide a tool for seamlessly upgrading and like allowing them to plan and I don't know, scanning the cluster, telling okay, RBAC now has changed, this application needs consuming RBAC this way, you just need to consume it in a totally different way, and like all the ecosystem has changed, and you can create like an actionable roadmap for them. So here's for the application team, just put it in the next 10 sprints. The cluster from a technical perspective, we're gonna upgrade like pretty straightforward, and it will be seamless. Then should be, I think it will be easier for them to understand that like the cost will be just a tool and some development time, rather than like keeping a team for operating the Kubernetes cluster. So
I think that it's easy to imagine with enough people and time we can make a better future together. What about others in the room? Does anybody else have thoughts? Are there others here who are operating clusters and thinking about how to support them?
So yeah, I've been operating Kubernetes for a while now, and we've had we were on 1.9.1.9.4 until last week, essentially on one cluster, right? So we've normally we're like I work for a startup, and essentially it's a very small team, and the only reason we've essentially upgraded is because we used to we got stock pods on 1.9 on AWS, and I think it's only surfaced.
Bug, yeah.
It's a bug, yeah. It's only surfaced with on some VMs. On some
And you won't
VMs.
get that fixed on 1.9, so you had to move forward.
We had to upgrade, and because we don't necessarily we have a lot of old we use a lot of older versions of things. It's very sort of difficult to upgrade, and we did try to upgrade to 1.10 before, but I think it was 1.10.6 or something. It was a version that had some permission issues on the pods, and it essentially just destroyed our Elasticsearch cluster for for that one. But it's we rolled back. It was fine. But sometimes it's, as I said, it's very difficult to, unless you invest a lot of time. Because when we performed this upgrade, it took us about 2 weeks, because we essentially spun up a new cluster, the same version, deployed all the software there, see what essentially broke, and then so we gain confidence in the upgrade pods. As he said, it would be nice to have more sort of tooling around.
We definitely need more tooling around that, yeah.
Yeah, so.
And there are some projects that people are talking about, and the earlier talk, the Google upgrade talk, that Cesar Xiaozhu said, I've got this proposal to make some of these tools, but I'm the only person working. So again, we need more people to get involved. So we don't have a whole lot of time left, but this working group is going like the normal Kubernetes meetings to have Zoom meetings, and I will be making sure that we have a meeting that is at a time friendly for China, and I would love to have people attend. We would love to have your comments and feedback, especially if you're one of these large operators attempting to do this. We'd love to bring you in to finding solutions in this space together. And anybody else have any last comments in the last couple of minutes? Questions, thoughts, ideas?
What's the best way to contact the SIG group?
Oh, so we're not a SIG, we're a working group, but like all of the others, we have a mailing list. It's Kubernetes WG LTS.
If you can type it, maybe it will be easier for the people to. And the Zoom links and stuff like that.
Let's see where to do this. Kubernetes Workgroup LTS. There we are. That's not very easy to see. And this won't load for me. So I'm sure you all have your ways of getting subscribed to the email list. If you subscribe, let's see, I can make something really big real quick. Kubernetes Workgroup LTS. Subscribe to that list. Also, if you look in the GitHub issues, there is an open issue for Workgroup LTS. I believe it's K Community issue number 2911. Workgroup LTS. If you search for that issue, there's discussion there. Once we resolve the discussion, if you look at the SIGs list, in that markdown list of all the SIGs and working groups, you'll see the LTS there. It'll have links to the mailing list. We have a Slack channel, working group, LTS. So all the normal things, work group, LTS. We've got the normal community stuff. And this is all just starting. We've had a variety of discussions over the last 3 months, and it's finally gotten to the point of formally proposing that the work group start. And we hope over the next 6 months or so to collect ideas and discussion and then maybe within 3 months already even, but over the 3 to 12 months, really start trying to enact some specific concrete changes, whether it's building some certain tools, identifying key APIs and configs that aren't yet well version managed or to stable GA, focusing work on those to bring them up to a higher level of stability. Conformance test is an area where Aaron Krickenberger right now is talking. Unfortunately, we're conflicted, but there's a bunch of work in the community to improve conformance testing. So all of this, I'm really hopeful that over the next year, this will really come together and build a better story. But we need more involvement from people with ideas and with time to contribute code as well. Well, we're at time. So thank you all for attending. I really would love to see some of your faces in the future as contributors in the work group and making Kubernetes better. So thank you. 谢谢。